Have you ever noticed how we treat our bodies like a simple math problem? We calculate the exact caloric deficit. We map out the perfect workout split. We buy all the organic groceries. And we prep our meals for the week. On paper, the blueprint is absolutely flawless. But then, it's 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. You've had a stressful day. And suddenly, that flawless blueprint is completely hijacked by a half-eaten pint of ice cream calling to you from the depths of the freezer. It's fascinating, really. We have all the tools, the science, and the access to information, yet the space between our ears remains the ultimate, undefeated boss fight of any health journey. Why is it that our own brain seems actively hostile to our long-term goals?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? And it's precisely because we treat dieting as a math problem when, in reality, it is a deeply complex psychological and neurological battlefield. We've been sold this cultural myth that dietary success is simply a matter of sheer willpower. But willpower is a fragile, fleeting resource. What we're really dealing with is a profound disconnect between our modern environment and our ancient biology. The psychology of dietary success isn't about white-knuckling your way through hunger. It's a critical bridge between our underlying biological mechanisms and our long-term behavioral success. If you don't understand why your brain is fighting your fat loss, you will eventually lose the war. Today, we have to look at how to use the latest neuroscience to actually fight back, rather than just blaming ourselves for not sticking to the plan.
Negotiating with the brain. I like that framework. Because when you're in the middle of a craving, it really does feel like a hostage situation, where your logical self is tied to a chair. Let's talk about that 9 p.m. ice cream scenario. There is a phrase that has been floating around a lot recently, and it perfectly captures that experience. Food noise. It's that constant, low-grade, mental chatter. You're not physically hungry, but your brain is running a continuous, exhausting loop of what's in the pantry, what you're going to eat tomorrow, what you shouldn't eat right now. What exactly is happening in our neurological circuitry when that noise gets so loud we simply can't ignore it?
What you are hearing when you experience that relentless food noise is essentially the sound of dopamine flooding your system. Now, we often misunderstand dopamine. Pop culture tells us it's the reward molecule, the thing that makes us feel good when we finally eat the ice cream. But leading neuroscientists have clarified that dopamine is actually the molecule of motivation, drive, and, most importantly, anticipation. It is the invisible force that gets you off the couch and walking toward the kitchen. Your brain is throwing a massive, celebratory parade just thinking about the hyperpalatable food. The tricky part is that this neurological drive is often triggered far more intensely by the anticipation of a reward rather than the actual consumption of the reward itself.
So the thrill is literally in the chase. The brain is getting high on the expectation. It's almost like swiping on a dating app. The anticipation of the match is often more intoxicating than the actual conversation that follows. If our neurology is hardwired to relentlessly seek out these high-reward, low-effort calories, how do we possibly turn the volume down on that noise without feeling completely miserable?
Exactly. It's the evolutionary chase. 10,000 years ago, if you stumbled across a massive source of sugar and fat, your brain needed to scream, "Consume this right now to survive the winter." Today, that same survival mechanism is being hijacked by a brightly colored package in the freezer aisle. Your brain is signaling for more because it's wired to seek out those high palatability rewards. To turn down the volume, we have to stop relying on our conscious brain to fight our subconscious drives. This brings us to a crucial concept in behavioral psychology: mental fatigue. Dieting is incredibly, profoundly draining on a psychological level. If you do not actively acknowledge and manage that fatigue, you will inevitably burn out.
That resonates so deeply. The sheer exhaustion of having to make 3 to 5 perfect choices every single day while navigating a world that is constantly shoving ultra-processed food in your face is overwhelming. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Eventually, your arms get tired, and that ball is going to shoot up to the surface. So, how do we manage this mental fatigue? If willpower is just a battery that drains throughout the day, how do we stop depleting it?
You stop depleting it by outsourcing your willpower to your environment. Leading experts in hypertrophy and fat loss emphasize that environmental control is the ultimate hack for sustainable dieting. Do not rely on your tired brain at 9 p.m. Set up your home and your workspace to completely minimize triggers. If the ice cream isn't in the freezer, the dopamine loop cannot be completed. You hack the dopamine response by removing the visual cues entirely. Make the right choice the absolute easiest choice, and the wrong choice highly inconvenient.
It's the classic path of least resistance. If I have to put on my shoes, find my keys, and drive 10 minutes to get a sugary snack, suddenly, my brain decides it's not worth the effort. But if it's sitting on my kitchen counter, I'm going to eat it. It sounds so simple, yet we resist it because we want to believe we are mentally strong enough to resist temptation. Speaking of psychological traps, there's another massive one that derails people: the obsession with the scale. I've seen so many people starve themselves down to a lower weight, only to end up feeling weak, lethargic, and visually dissatisfied, what people call the skinny fat trap.
That is a phenomenal point, and it's a devastating psychological trap. Psychologically, we need to focus heavily on muscle retention and performance, not just a lower, arbitrary number on the scale. When you only focus on the scale going down, any stall in weight loss feels like a catastrophic failure. But when you shift your focus to getting stronger, to retaining muscle mass, you create a completely different psychological feedback loop. Seeing yourself lift heavier weights, feeling your posture improve, feeling physically capable, those are powerful, daily psychological wins that keep you motivated even when the scale refuses to budge. It shifts your identity from someone who is depriving themselves to someone who is building themselves.
That identity shift is everything. You move from a mindset of shrinking to a mindset of growing. But let's venture into what is arguably the darkest and most demoralizing phase of any health journey: the weight regain. We all know the tragic narrative. Someone works incredibly hard, they lose 30 pounds, they celebrate, and then, slowly but surely, it feels like an invisible hand is pushing them right back to their old weight. The psychological toll of that is staggering. It breeds a terrifying amount of self-blame. People think, I lost the weight, but I couldn't keep it off, so I must be fundamentally weak.
And that right there is the tragedy of modern diet culture. We moralize a biological function. That invisible hand you mentioned? That is a very real biological phenomenon. Leaders in clinical obesity medicine have mapped out the biology of hunger and weight regain extensively. They explain that after significant weight loss, your body doesn't know you just wanted to look good for a beach vacation. Your body thinks you just survived a famine. Consequently, it exerts a massive biological push to get you back to your previous set point. Your hunger hormones skyrocket, and your satiety hormones plummet. Your metabolic rate actually drops to conserve energy.
So, you are literally fighting millions of years of evolutionary programming. Your body is screaming at you to eat because it thinks it's saving your life. And meanwhile, society is telling you that you just lack discipline. That sounds like a perfect recipe for chronic shame. How do we break out of that cycle? Because if we accept that biology is working against us, it could easily turn into nihilism. People might just say, well, if my biology wants me to be heavy, why even try?
That's exactly the pitfall we want to avoid. And this is where the concept of clinical realism becomes so incredibly vital. Clinical realism is about looking at the cold, hard biological facts without attaching moral judgment to them. When you deeply understand that weight regain is a medical and biological mechanism, you can finally move from self-shame to practical, objective management. It is not a character flaw, it is biology. When a diabetic's blood sugar spikes, we don't call them morally weak. We adjust their management strategy. We need to apply that exact same grace and scientific objectivity to weight management. Once you drop the shame, you free up an immense amount of mental energy to actually focus on sustainable habits.
That is incredibly liberating to hear. Just stripping away the moral weight of dieting changes the entire landscape of the conversation. So, let's talk about those sustainable habits. If we are looking at this not as a 20-day sprint for a wedding, but as a 20-year strategy for a vibrant life, how do we rewire our brains to make this a permanent lifestyle? What does the neuroscience of long-term habit formation actually look like in practice?
It requires a multi-layered approach, and the very foundation of that approach, which surprises a lot of people, is sleep. We have to view sleep as a primary metabolic tool. When you are sleep deprived, your baseline dopamine levels absolutely tank. When your baseline dopamine is low, your brain starts frantically searching for a quick hit to bring it back up, which leads directly to increased cravings for junk food and a severe decrease in executive function and willpower. If you aren't managing your sleep, you are fighting a biological war with one arm tied behind your back.
It's amazing how we constantly look for the magic supplement or the secret superfood, but we completely ignore the fact that we're sleeping 5 hours a night and running on cortisol and caffeine. But beyond sleep, there's also the reality of our cultural lives. Food is connection. Food is family. I think one of the reasons diets fail is that they demand we completely isolate ourselves from our culture. If you come from a culture where rice is a staple, and a diet tells you that you can never eat carbohydrates again, you are setting yourself up for a psychological break.
Absolutely. And this is why consistency will always trump intensity. You must align your dietary changes with your actual, lived lifestyle. There are brilliant medical professionals advocating for blending humor and science together to make these cultural dietary realities manageable. You don't have to give up your cultural staples, you just have to understand how to balance them without feeling deprived. This ties perfectly into utilizing a data-driven approach. When you understand the deep science and the why behind your metabolic shifts, say understanding how protein impacts your blood sugar, that knowledge provides a profound intrinsic motivation to stick with it.
Knowledge is armor, and part of that armor is also learning what to ignore. The fitness and nutrition industry is plagued by fear-based messaging. Every week, there is a new, scary food. First, it was fats. Then, it was carbs. Now, it's seed oils or artificial sweeteners. It creates this constant state of anxiety around eating, which just adds to the mental fatigue we talked about earlier.
That fear-mongering is incredibly toxic to long-term success. This is why myth-busting is such a crucial part of the psychological toolkit. When you stop fearing specific foods, when you stop falling for sensationalist, fear-based marketing, your psychological stress drops significantly. You realize that a single cookie isn't poison, and a single salad isn't a cure. It's the aggregate of your choices over months and years that dictates your health. Removing the fear removes the neuroticism, allowing for a much more balanced, peaceful relationship with food.
It really does all come back to the mind, doesn't it? To wrap up this masterclass on the psychology of dieting, let's synthesize our toolkit for the listeners. First, we have to quiet the noise. Understand that a dopamine craving is just a biological signal, not a command that you have to obey. Second, control your space. Use environmental hacks to save your willpower, because your willpower is a battery, not a limitless resource. Third, practice clinical realism. Stop the endless shame cycle by understanding the very real biology of weight regain. And finally, stay relatable. Keep the journey lighthearted, culturally relevant, and driven by data, not fear.
Beautifully summarized. At the end of the day, the greatest transformation doesn't happen on the plate. It happens in the mind. When you finally bridge that gap between your brain's ancient wiring and your modern biological goals, you stop fighting yourself. You start working with your human nature instead of against it. And that is exactly where the magic happens. It's a journey of self-compassion just as much as it is a journey of physical health.
A journey of self-compassion. I think that is the perfect note to leave our listeners with today. It challenges us to look in the mirror and offer ourselves a little more grace and a lot more strategy. Thank you all for tuning in to this deep dive. Be sure to check out our strategic report on metabolic health for more specific, data-driven dietary strategies to help you build your own sustainable blueprint. We'll see you next time. And remember, your mind is your most powerful metabolic tool.
Until next time, take care of your mind, and your body will follow.